originally called XP Denver. I don't know if any of you were around back then in the early 2000s, but yeah, originally started as XP Denver about 20 years ago. So I've been around ever since then. Keep coming back for more. All right. So my topic today is about the keys to sustainable business agility. And I want to kick it off actually with a very short survey. So I'm going to share here in the Zoom chat a link to it, 2 questions, and invite all of you to please click on that link and fill in that survey. I'll do a screen share here in a moment, and we can watch the results come in.
Now, Brad, you didn't clear them, right? Because I actually had gone in a little bit ago. Okay.
Oh, really?
Well, I did the Miro.
All right.
Thing.
It didn't clear them out. So if you already participated, though, hey, that's fine. We'll see him come in here, hopefully, in semi-real time. So we got 6, there comes 7 responses. Trying to count how many total I should expect here. It's like around 10 or 11.
Yep.
Looks like we have a big winner. Overloaded teams, lots of whip. Not too surprised to hear that. I often say that's the biggest challenge I run into over and over again with clients that I work with. So not surprising, but interesting to see that here. Lots of votes for unclear business goals, culture. It's a big one in a lot of the big sort of global surveys on agility. It comes up over and over again, culture. There we go. Let's have one more vote for overloaded teams, and one for culture there. Agility is not a priority for leadership. Coming in pretty strong there. Leaders not removing hurdles. Oh, interesting. We will see how these align with some of my topics coming up later. Some of the short answers there. Leaders making all the decisions. Sounds like we may want to empower other folks to get involved in some decisions besides just our leaders. I kicked off an engagement with a client a while ago. I had the CEO in the room with a bunch of a cross section of people across the organization. And CEO told everyone, we're here because we need to create teams of owners and not teams of order takers, which I loved to hear coming straight from the CEO. So that's the kind of thing I want to hear from leaders is we want to create order, people who take ownership, not just people who take orders. Government customers, yep. A lot of that happening. Now there's a lot of movement within government agencies to move in an agile direction. In the DoD specifically, I know some motion there. So not that that's going to happen quickly or overnight, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's no law in the federal government that says every government contract must be waterfall. So some people seem to think that's the case. Absolutely not true. Not training people. All right. Cool, interesting results. Let's get on with it there. This will feed nicely, I think, into the content I have. I'm going to switch and share my screen here, go through the content. By the way, we don't have a huge group here. If you've got a question as we're going through things, raise a hand. I'll try to pay attention to that. I might not notice hands going up. but you can also use the chat. I'll try to address some of the questions kind of as we go. If we get in too many, I might defer some till later. So Sally just raised a hand. Was that a question or is that demonstrating the hand raising?
Demonstrating.
All right. So I don't always notice those hand raises, but if I do, I'll try to take those questions as we get them. All right, so let's go in to the presentation here. 6 keys. Hopefully I'm sharing the right thing. Everybody can see my screen, I hope. See a thumbs up, great. All right, let's get right down to it then. All right, so a little bit about me. Sally mentioned my company is Agility 11. I've been doing this Agile thing since I was a software developer using extreme programming, believe it or not, in 1999. I was very lucky to be at a company that was a very early adopter of Agile practices. So nobody even knew what the hell Agile was. In fact, that word wasn't even coined yet, right? Agile Manifesto was written in 2001, but XP was around before that. So that was my introduction to Agile a long time ago. And it sort of changed my view of what it takes to be successful in building complex stuff like software. I got some certifications, big deal, not a big deal. I'm a member of the Agile Leadership Journey, and we're a global consortium of leadership guides. So happy to be part of that group of great folks that helps leaders and organizations do some of this stuff well. So let's move on. Okay, so key number 1 to sustainable business agility, create urgency. And by the way, this comes straight out of John Kotter's playbook. His book's called Leading Change. So if we're talking about changing an organization to be more agile, we need to have a compelling reason for why is this important now? Not just why is it important, but why is it important now? Because lots of things are important. But if this isn't important now, it's not going to happen. So we need to create some urgency. So what are some examples here? I've shared some examples of what true urgency looks like. Like, we are losing market share. If we don't turn this around, we will be out of business. We have a compelling reason why we need to do this now. We might have OKRs or KPIs that create some urgency. We're all aiming for hitting a goal. We all have incentives tied to hitting those goals. We need to create that urgency for change. We don't always have that real urgency. Few flavors we sometimes see that are not really urgent is somebody approves the budget and hires the consultants and just says, all right, somebody give me a report every quarter on how we're doing. Doesn't sound very urgent. Another flavor I see sometimes is we're using the XYZ framework. We want to make sure everybody's 90% compliant with the framework 6 months from now, so go do it. And what's the reason? Why are we doing this? Why is that important now? Not just because somebody says we got to follow the framework. So the urgency needs to be based on true business goals. And the best organizations are going to target 2 or 3 real concrete outcomes they want to improve is the reason why we're implementing Agile practices or doing this Agile thing. I happen to use a framework called Path to Agility as a way to guide my clients through this journey. And Path to Agility starts with this set of 9 potential business goals. You don't have to aim for all 9, but pick the ones that matter. There are relationships between them and figure out what you're really trying to accomplish. We need to have business goals, urgent business goals behind why we're doing this thing. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the traction. So base it in real business goals to start with. Let's keep moving. Number 2, this is another one out of John Kotter's model. Powerful guiding coalition. Got to have somebody, we got to have several somebodies with a lot of influence that are leading us in this journey towards agility. So it's going to be a complex journey. It's not going to be easy. So what are some examples here of what does a powerful coalition look like? And this first bullet here, this is a real example from a former client of mine, Ericsson. The senior VP within the division of Ericsson we worked with asked for a personal commitment from every one of her staff, every one of the VPs that reported to her, to get on board with this 100%. She told them all, if you're not on board, if you're unsure this is the right direction to go, I respect that and that's fine. You'll still have a job at Ericsson, but you won't be working for me. I'll find you another job, but you won't be working for me anymore if you're not 100% on board for this. We need some senior execs on board to drive this actively, not just, again, the checkbook of, sure, I'll approve the budget, go get the consultants and come in and do the thing. We need leaders with skin in the game here and from the right departments, right functions engaged. So what does the impotent coalition look like? Sometimes we say, hey, this is just an IT thing. IT, you're on your own. You can figure this out. The rest of us, we're all good. We don't need to make any changes. Or one of my favorites, PMO will drive compliance. Will be the process police and make everyone do Agile. That's probably not going to go over so well. Sadly, all too often, I do see this one. Execs, they are busy people. I appreciate that. But if they're too busy to get involved actively, it goes back to our number one key, which is obviously this was not urgent enough. We didn't create the urgency or the compelling business reasons why this is important. So therefore, they're not involved. And again, you're probably not going to get very far. You're not going to be able to sustain whatever gains you might make without that. Here's another one. Just do what the consultants tell us to do. Do whatever they say, and we'll be good. All right, let me pause there. We've seen our first two. So first one being create urgency. Second one, powerful coalition. Any questions so far, or anybody have any maybe stories you could tell, whether they're success stories or perhaps horror stories around urgency or leadership coalition? So Jim might have one. Jim, you're muted.
Sorry about that. One of the things that I've noted as far as Agile transformation, two major danger points regarding transformation has been at the executive level. We may have the greatest knowledgeable workers in the organization that can go ahead and do amazing things, but it's only executive management that can go ahead and change the system. Number two, okay, during Agile transformation, if middle management gets lost in translation or transformation, okay, you will fail.
Yeah.
It's those two items or those two specific areas, because this not only has to go ahead and be at the executive level, it needs to literally come down to middle management. Basically the people that are dealing with it, if they don't understand their roles in the new environment, they're going to resist.
Yeah.
The other issue that I've also looked at is the fact that with transformation, it's not a military invasion. Okay.
For sure.
Cultural change. And so consequently, one of the things that I've looked at when I've been involved with it is to go ahead and take into account that every organization has three profiles. They have the early adopters, they have silent majority, and they have the resistors. And what you want to do is you want to kind of focus on the early adopters to help build a momentum. Go ahead and implement these changes, let them see the value of it, and then advertise the success of not only the projects, but the people involved with it, slowly moving to silent majority and then onto the resistors.
Yeah, I as I mentioned, I borrowed some things here from John Cotter. One of the other steps in his model is quick wins. So Jim, you just talked about, you've got to find those early adopters, get some successes and amplify it.
Yes, sir.
Definitely important. It didn't make my top 6, but I could have made this the top 15 keys, but that would have been a much longer talk. So yeah, good point. Good point on middle management. When I talk about this guiding coalition, powerful guiding coalition, needs to include some folks in the middle as well. You're right. That's often where things get really tricky. You may have execs engaged and on board, and you may have teams engaged and on board, but if you don't have that buy-in in the middle, nothing's going to move forward without that as well. So don't forget about those folks. Good insight. All right, so culture, Jim mentioned culture too. Absolutely. Cultivate the cultures is the way I like to think about culture. A lot of people say, hey, our culture, is at odds with Agile. I don't know that there's any one culture where you can't find ways for Agile practices and mindset to create an advantage, but it's a matter of cultivating the culture first with an awareness of what type of a culture do we have. I've done another talk on this at this very meetup, I believe, but I like to leverage the competing values framework, which identifies these 4 major culture types. And the research behind the model, which by the way is very well researched and has been applied for a long time now, indicates that you're only as strong as your weakest quadrant here. So in reality, all organizations have a mix of these 4 cultures, but where problems happen is if you're too heavily in one culture at the expense of lacking in the other. So you need to have some level of balance here for long-term success as an organization. So how this typically looks is and there's a survey behind this, by the way, to actually measure this, but you can actually figure out the shape of your organization's culture. So here at the solid line, that indicates the shape of the current culture. And this example here, and this is just an example, shows an organization that's very strongly anchored in a control culture, pretty weak in create. And the dotted line represents what is the preferred culture. So starting with that awareness, as a leadership team, we want to agree on, well, where do we want to shift our culture? Notice we're not throwing out the control culture. That can be a very strong aspect of how we succeed, but we might need to lessen that just a little bit in order to create space to maybe move in the direction of being more of a create culture. So this is that deliberate intent, starting with the awareness of where are we, where do we need to be more balanced as an organization. And then given that, I like to say we want to respect the culture and reshape the culture. So again, if we're a strong control culture, celebrate that, understand the strengths that gives us, and talk about how we can get a little more of those other areas. So we might want to keep some of the things that help us with our current culture. We might want to do more of certain things in other areas. We might want to do a little bit less of some things in certain areas. So if you zoom in on those sticky notes, you'll see these symbols on there, the pluses, the minuses, the check marks that indicate what are we trying to keep, what do we want to do more of, what do we want to do less of, in order to make that gentle shift in culture. And if you go in guns blazing saying we're all about collaboration in Agile, it's all about collaboration, everybody has to collaborate, but you're not realizing that you're starting perhaps in a strong compete culture, you're not going to get very far with that approach. So instead, you need to figure out which parts of an Agile approach are going to align with a compete culture. Well, let's emphasize those things that are not going to be so hard for the organization to accept, so they can latch on to those things that match with their values, while also perhaps nudging a little bit more in a different direction.
Hey, Brad,
Yes.
could you talk a little bit more about the context of when you might do this exercise? Who's there? How did you get them there? What
Yeah.
what does that event look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I try my best to do this very early in an engagement with the client. So when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, we want to do an agile adoption, agile transformation," or oftentimes it's organizations that say, "Hey, we've done this agile thing for a while, but we've kind of hit a plateau and we want to figure out how to get to that next level." Um, I want to do this as early as I can, in part because it's so critical to shaping how we approach the way we implement things, and also because it's a way to draw in and get leadership engaged and understanding really the implications of this. So
Hmm.
I often find that leaders say, "Hey, yeah, we want to do this agile thing," and they don't initially appreciate the extent to which they need to be personally engaged in it. Um, and I think this conversations helps those leaders realize, wow, if we need to be involved as leaders in shaping the culture. It's not just about implementing a process at the team level. Um, and if they also see through this that perhaps their culture is out of balance, they're realizing there's a bigger picture. Again, it's not just about doing Scrum or doing Safe or doing whatever. It's we need to be, as leaders, continually cultivating the culture that we want to see in the organization. By the way, on the right side there, culture is this nebulous thing. And so it's hard to think about, well, how do we actually affect culture? The way that I talk about it is in terms of running experiments, where you may run an experiments with structures, policies, metrics, and with leadership behaviors that you believe will move you in whichever direction you're trying to go here on this model. We do think of those as experiments, because I think that's a good segue. It'll come up later. I'll talk about complexity a little bit later. But and the experiment language, I think, is important here, because if we say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and that is going to result in the following outcome, we're not acknowledging that this is a really complex, messy business, organization change, culture change. You can't predict ahead of time that if I do this, we will definitely get this result, unfortunately. So we have to accept that there's a lot of variables and hard to predict how these things are going to turn out. So treat them as experiments. All right, move on to key number 4, removing the hurdles with proactive leadership. So we know this is a tough thing to do, to implement organization change. So if we have the urgency, if we have that guiding coalition, we understand our culture and how we want to shape it. Next step is, let's be prepared for running into some really big hurdles along the way. We're going to need some of those leaders in that coalition to be actively involved in removing those. So I mentioned Ericsson before as a former client that I worked with. They did this very, very well. In their transformation, the senior managers proactively and frequently would go visit teams. And this was, by the way, back in the day when people were actually in an office and they worked together face to face, if anybody remembers those days.
Vaguely.
Yeah, so the execs would actually, they would schedule time with teams, and they would come in and sit down and say, "Hey, tell me what kind of challenges you're running into. We've asked you to be one of the trailblazer teams and piloting this new thing we're doing. Help me understand what's hard about it." And then they very visibly would work on removing those roadblocks. So I love the way they did this. They had a whiteboard out in the office atrium. So everybody walked past this every single day on the way in and out of the office. And the leadership team would meet there for their daily stand-ups, meet there for their weekly plannings, and they would go through, all right, what are the roadblocks we're working on removing? And so people would see that very active leadership, again, skin in the game in terms of helping to work through the challenges. Going to be plenty of hurdles. Again, I like to set the stage with leadership right up front that, hey, if you want to go through this journey, you better expect it's going to be challenging. There's going to be a lot of roadblocks and hurdles, and we're going to need your help in removing those. You can't just step back and delegate that to someone else.
Brad?
Yeah.
How do problems get on here in this case?
Yeah, great question. So one way, as I mentioned, is directly from the teams. When leaders would go to those teams and say, hey, tell me about your challenges, they would walk away with those. We also, we had a team of coaches working with those teams, and the coaches could surface challenges and bring those to the leadership team as well. So those were the two main ways where the visibility into these challenges would sort of make their way to the leadership team. Now, important to note here, we also want to empower teams to take care of their own problems. We don't want teams to treat everything as someone else's problem. So certainly there's certain kinds of issues that teams can tackle themselves, but there's also a large class of problems that are outside of a team's really sphere of influence. And those are the things we would bring to the leadership team.
So Brad, could this take the shape or form of roaming that is typically done in PI planning?
Well, certainly, at any point in time, I would say we may uncover a hurdle or challenge that we run into. Yeah, I mean, on a small scale there, yes, I've seen some of these, roadblocks and challenges come up in the midst of one of those big planning sessions like that, where I like to have leaders there for that purpose of saying, hey, we ran into a conflict between these two teams. We need to resolve something. They don't have the authority to resolve it themselves. Who can step in and do it? So it might be, kind of on the fly. In this case, this was more of the bigger systemic challenges. One example I have here was when we got started with Ericsson, they did, well, little background. Believe it or not, Ericsson has a proprietary programming language, or they did at the time. They invented their own programming language, folks. Therefore, you have to create all of your own tools because you can't buy tools for your proprietary programming language. So one of the things they were lacking was a good automated testing framework. Quickly ran into the hurdle of, hey, how can we possibly deliver a working system every couple of weeks if we can't do automated testing? So the leadership team realized we need to get some people to build an automated testing framework that our teams can use so we can get something done in a 3-week sprint. So that was something they had to invest in order to enable this agile journey to move forward. All right, number 5, own your own unique journey. Again, we're in a complex space here. You can't just install Agile. I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't assume, maybe many of you have seen this thing on the right side before called the Cynefin framework on complexity. Not going to go too deep into it, but the Cynefin framework sort of is identifying different domains of complexity. In that lower right there, some problems are obvious. They have obvious solutions, also known as simple domain. Some problems are complicated. They require expertise. But that expertise can get us through those problems in a pretty predictable, repeatable fashion. Then we move into the complex domain. And this is the domain we're in when we're talking about organization change. We lose predictability here. We can't predict in advance in a complex system what's going to happen. So when I push this lever here, I don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the system. It's too complex to predict these things. So using the Cynefin language, the way we need to do things in a complex domain is probe sense respond, meaning another word of saying we run experiments. We run experiments, we measure the results or the outcomes of those experiments, and then we learn and respond based on what's happening there. So the practices we come up with emerge because we don't know in advance what practices or what steps are going to get us where we need to be. That's the reality of working in the complex domain. And the implications of this, as I've gotten my last three bullets there is no recipe. Can't follow a 12-step process and get to the conclusion. Hate to tell you all, there is no silver bullet framework. Can't just go, hey, do this framework and it will solve all of our problems for us. There is no linear path. And there's no 12-step program where you can just follow the steps and get where you want to be. So important to know this up front, that we're going to be following, as I kind of showed in that previous thing, it's going to be a long and winding road. Hard to predict what's coming up around the next curve. Maybe I'll pause there for a moment, see if there's questions, reactions around this idea of complexity.
Well, one of the things that I can share is that I'm certified in a number of different frameworks, scaling and stuff like that. But one of the things I thought was interesting was I got certified with SAFe back in 2013. And one of the early adopters was Nokia. John Deere, you've got some others, and they've rocked with SAFe. But what's interesting to note is Nokia is gone. It's history. It went away. And I basically believe the reason why that happened was they looked at the framework as a solution rather than a means to meet their goals.
Yeah, Sally mentioned earlier our next speaker who will be talking about lean agile leadership. That's one of the areas of SAFe which I really, really love, that I think a lot of organizations don't really, unfortunately, I don't think they do very well at adapting. I think they look at the structural elements of it, and again, they often focus on compliance. Just do these things, do your release trains, have these roles, and then we can check the box and say we're agile. But without that lean, agile leadership mindset, that growth mindset, again, it's probably not going to be sustainable over the long term.
Agreed. Essentially, it ends up becoming agile for show.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noted is I've been involved with Agile for a while, and my feeling is as we go to the path, we're starting to deal with the resistors, companies that are feeling like they're forced to go ahead and become agile. And so they're doing it for show, basically bending the practices and everything so that it doesn't really affect them, and saying, yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, I have a similar, I agree with you, by the way. I have a similar perspective, though, which is for the last few years, I found myself on the sponsorship side of Agile transformations. And one of the problems I had at my previous place was, it was like, oh, well, Charlie's just he's just the Agile guy. He's just the SAFe guy. And I'd be like, well, pump the brakes there. Pump the brakes. Like, yeah, we're using SAFe. Actually, we're using it very vanilla. But it's a two-step process. And they kind of look at me like with their head crooked, and I'd be like, look, I care about the organization having a culture of learning and adapting, and I care about being able to iterate in small batches, and whatever. And I looked at how we might get there really, really quickly, and here's a set of material that's ready to go. It's an economics that worked for us, so we pick SAFe. And so we anchored people, and they'd be like, oh, so you're about like actually us responding to market conditions? And it was just taking people through. It's not a one-step. We're not implementing SAFe. No, we're actually creating an environment of business agility, and we're using SAFe. And that simple decoupling is all I had to do to get my brand back.
No, I hear you. It's like I said, it's one of those things where, and this slide says it all. Okay, you just can't install it.
Yeah.
So I'm fully on board on that. But like I said, it's amazing. I've seen some banks, major banks, they go ahead and do safe, but guess what? The PI is only 3 sprints. And by the way, the IP is 4 hours. So Agile for show. And that happens a lot, especially when you're dealing with government organizations,
Right.
or some of the higher bureaucratic organizations.
Yeah, and actually, I'll speak to that real quick. So I actually, where I came from was a government organization, and it was a team that I didn't work on, but it was kind of adjacent to what I was working on. So I got to kind of see from the sidelines. But this was probably, I would say, like a relatively large scale development team that had implemented SAFE. And the leadership there they thought SAFE was the culture, not the thing that would allow them to help build a culture. They didn't understand that once you got SAFE in, they said, all right, well, how is that helping you implement the culture you want to move towards? And they're like, we don't understand. I thought SAFE was the culture we were doing. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
That's why in the board I put AI as my kryptonite, because I refer to artificial intelligence as the executive level management in a number of organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to be very clear here. There's nothing inherently wrong with picking a framework like SAFE. The challenge is, again, if the approach is we're just going to install this framework without doing those things that I talked about earlier in the presentation, which is 1, what is your urgent reason for doing this? Why is it important now? What are your business goals? 2, who is going to guide this? Got to have those things in place. Number 3, we have to respect the culture and understand deliberately how we might want to shift the culture as part of this.
And
how it fits in
with that, Brad.
What's that? Sorry.
I said I agree wholeheartedly with the statement that you made. I mean, I've used SAFE in certain areas, and other areas I've used Scrum at scale. There's some areas that want to go ahead and use less. The thing is, it's a tool to achieve your goal. And you also need to go ahead and look at the company culture. You also need to go ahead and look at how modular they are. In other words, okay, how many interdependencies do they have or don't have? And make decisions on that. Again, it's a tool to go ahead and achieve your goals, not the solution.
Yeah, it's all about achieving the goals. The goal is never to do Agile or do SAFE or do large scale Scrum or do whatever. It's achieving a business outcome. I want to move forward. So I mentioned the Path to Agility framework earlier. So on the one hand, I firmly believe you can't just install the framework. On the other hand, we need some guidance, right? This is difficult stuff. So it also doesn't work to just say, hey, you can't just follow the steps. You need to figure it all out on your own. That also isn't going to help. So what I really like about the Path to Agility framework is I think it finds a great middle ground. It gives you guidance in the journey with flexibility to respect the idea that this is complex and there is no single path to get you there. I don't want to turn this into a presentation on Path to Agility itself, but the framework is compatible with whatever framework you might choose to use, Scrum, Kanban, SAFE, large-scale Scrum, whatever. This is about helping you realize as we go through this journey across the top here, kind of from left to right, generally we're going to go through these stages of aligning what we're doing and why, learning some new things, getting to a stage of predict or predictability, and getting faster and better. And then ultimately, if we get where we want to be, we achieve a state of adaptability where we can adapt to changing market conditions and changing needs. At the end of the day, that is the entire purpose of the Agile movement. If a little history lesson, when the Agile Manifesto was written in 2001, the authors voted on, what do we call this thing we're doing? And as we all know now, they chose the word Agile, but a very close second place term was adaptive. So we're 1 or 2 votes away here from today from being part of Adaptive Denver Meetup. And that adaptability is at the heart of the purpose of Agile in the first place, in order to deal with complex situations and complex problems which don't have predictable solutions. So again, I'm not going to go through all the details here. Maybe that's a talk for a different day, and Sally or Randy are also well qualified to do that.
Brad, I think you nailed it though. It's the path to agility.
Yeah.
Okay? And it can involve any, it can involve whatever framework might best aid you in terms of getting on your path to agility.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you got it nailed anyway, regardless if they call it Agile or not, or adaptive.
Right.
That says it all for me.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to dig too deep here into the framework, because we could easily go down a rabbit hole there. So
Agreed.
I'll keep
And I don't mean to do that.
No worries. All right, so number 6, focus. This gets back to that little poll that I had you all participate in right before I launched into here. What was the biggest thing that got the most votes? Was teams are overloaded. We got too much work in process. I've seen this at literally every client I've ever worked with. Way too much stuff going on. If we sort of rewind all the way back to the beginning here, if everybody is so buried in work that they can't stop to breathe, if they can't stop to make an improvement, we're never going to get anywhere, right? They're going to say, yeah, I can't work on that improvement thing because I got to deliver my thing by tomorrow or I lose my job. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, and in my experience, that is sort of a carryover from the IT mentality in the 80s and 90s, which was, how do we optimize for cost? Right? And when you optimize for cost, you want to make sure that utilization is as close to 100% as possible so you don't have waste. And what that gives you is, yeah, you think you're optimizing for cost, but you're crushing your ability to deliver value quickly.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I see it everywhere. Unfortunately, it's pretty ubiquitous. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but fundamental concept in lean thinking is the idea of a push system over a pull system. And really that's what we need to aim for. We need a pull system, not a push system. The story I like to tell with another client I worked with, I was invited in by the IT group. They brought me in because their business stakeholders complain that IT is too slow. It takes too long to get IT stuff done. Well, on day 1 of the engagement, so I went around and met people and talked to them. One of the things I asked was, well, tell me how many projects you're working on. And people would say 5, 6, 7, 8 projects at the same time. So became very quick. Became apparent very quickly why IT was taking so long to get stuff done, because everybody was working on 6 or 7 or 8 projects at a time. So took that back to the VP who brought me in, and I sort of gave him the list and said, hey, here are all the projects that your people are working on. He looked at that and said, wow, I had no idea people were working on all those things at the same time. Pretty soon afterward, he said, hey, that doesn't seem like a very good way to get things done. We've got to focus. Now, it's easy to say that, harder to make the tough choices around what do we focus on and what do we push out till later. So you've got to make those tough choices. And again, this gets back to leadership making those tough choices. We're going to focus on these things now, and other things we're going to have to wait till later because we can't do everything at once. So one of my favorite phrases of all time: stop starting, start finishing. I don't care how many projects you can start. I care about how many projects you can finish. Again, I've seen this at every organization, including the client, my biggest client I'm working with right now. It's a big challenge for them. What I have been able to do is, with my primary contact there, is she's told me multiple times, I'm on a mission now to tell everyone in the organization, every time you say yes to something, you have to also say no to something else. So we got to stop adding to the pile of work. We have to treat everything as a trade-off. If we're going to do this, that means we're not going to do something else. At least we're not going to do it now. Some language I've sometimes find useful here is to talk about sequencing these projects. And by the way, I use the term project here in a very generic sense, whatever you call these, epics, initiatives, whatever. We have to sequence them. Sometimes that term sequence can be accepted a little bit better than prioritizing. To say one thing is higher priority than something, you can get in a religious war over that. But to say, hey, this project needs to happen before that one, that's maybe a little less threatening. So we got to sequence work so that we're implementing a pull system.
Okay.
All right. So that is the end. And here's just a recap of the 6. Maybe I'll open it up to either questions or, again, if anybody has any interesting war stories to tell. Heard some good ones here, so.
I do.
Hey, Brad.
Actually, before that, we've already heard a couple of Jim's war stories. I wanted to see if maybe there's somebody else has one.
Somebody else do it.
Yeah. Hey, Brad, it's Kim. I'd love to jump in with a question on, right, these keys are amazing, right? As coaches, we've seen this being downfalls in many organizations. My question is, I'm curious if you feel like maybe these 6 keys are dependent on where an organization is in their evolution. I'm thinking Lalou's reinventing organizations, that maybe they might not be at a place where they can kind of grok some of this, or I don't know. I'm just curious.
I'm reflecting on that a little bit. I think the challenge is, honestly, I find it not so common that organizations are able to really get to these 6 keys. I don't think it's necessarily because of where they're at. I think going to the first key here is they have to start with that urgency. There has to be a really compelling reason of why is this important for us to do right now. And if you don't start with that, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure, I think, from the beginning, because, oh, this is just another one of those initiatives on the long list of all the initiatives that everybody's asking us to do. So why am I doing this? I got to have that sense of urgency. And then going to the culture piece as well, a little bit ties in with reinventing organizations in Lalou. Regardless of what culture we have, I don't think I've ever come across an organization where when they examine their culture, they say, yep, we're spot on. It's exactly what we want it to be. It's perfect. It's all systems go. Everything's just running on rails. We don't need to worry about the culture. It's perfect. I don't tend to find that. So regardless of what the culture is, again, my approach is respect that culture, value the strengths that culture brings us, and accept that we probably need to be a little more balanced here and there. Bring in the pieces and parts of lean and agile and scrum and kanban and safe and less that are going to resonate with our culture, that aren't going to be rejected immediately, and then have the leadership to, yes, push us a little bit, push us out of our comfort zone a little bit to that culture that we're trying to create.
Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the questions I usually ask when somebody asks you, we want to do a transformation is, why? What are you doing today that you think is so wrong that you think Agile is going to fix?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that, they're trying to, we're just trying to, get work out faster. And I said, you really can't make work go faster. That's not an accomplishment of Agile. Because this thing, I can get this project done faster by doing Agile. No, you might get the most important things out faster,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual project will not go any faster.
Yeah, around that speed one, I like to dig a little bit deeper. Well, why is that speed important to you?
Yep.
Do we need to be more responsive to changing market conditions, or what our competitors are doing, or whatever? And so, yeah, there's nothing wrong with having that business objective of we need to be, faster, more responsive. But again, dig a little bit deeper. Why is that important in the urgency thing? Maybe the urgency is we just lost a major customer contract because we couldn't respond fast enough, or we weren't able to adapt well enough, and our competitors came in and took that business away from us. Mm-hmm. That might be one of those compelling reasons that gives you that urgency around why we're doing this. Other questions, other war stories?
And another one I from another lecture I listened to is that you got to find those bottlenecks of what's slowing, where in your process is it slowing down? If you follow the process through, there's somewhere in there that's all of a sudden taking weeks to do that should, can we fix that week's worth of wait time? Or
for sure. Yeah, that the key number 4 here, that could be an example, one of those hurdles. Taking a systems view of your organization and identifying where those bottlenecks are and treating them as bottlenecks, and then adapting so we can remove those constraints. Absolutely. Charlie, I think you're muted, but it looks like you're speaking there.
There was the grid of the complexity.
Evan?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with it. I learned that tonight. Thank you for sharing that, Brad.
Sure.
Glad to learn that. I want to maybe challenge something where you had said it's in the top left corner. Can you pull that up for a second, if you don't mind?
Help me make sure.
There we go.
This one.
I wholeheartedly agree. Org change is complex. One of the things that I have reflected on is that everyone's experience is very different when it comes to Agile transformation, and then that drives their action, their behaviors, and then ultimately the actions that they take. Because to someone who's in the trenches, who just needs tool setting and they need to just have Agile methods at the team level, it's pretty freaking obvious what they need. But so that's their experience. But then somebody who's overwhelmed by all the activities that have to happen to reform program management, this is pretty complicated, right? And then to someone who's outside of the engineering group who just watches all this swirl, well, this is pretty freaking chaotic. These people are a mess. And it's because people have these different experiences that the system breaks down, is they're not respecting that others are having a different experience as it relates to Agile transformation. I would just introduce that it's a framing problem in addition to just that it is complex.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And one of the things that makes this inherently complex is the fact that we're dealing with many humans. Mm-hmm. And again, their perceptions, their past experiences, their motivations, their fears. It's complex enough with one person, let alone hundreds or thousands of them. So you're absolutely right that human dimension of this is a really important thing to pay attention to.
Extending slightly off that, and Jim, your comment about the executive team. I'm on the executive team of a large company, and I get an inside view as to what that looks like. And what I would say is there is a fundamental flaw with most of more major corporations. And that is that most of the people in an executive level are fundamentally incented to only protect a function. And so the idea that they would collaborate is actually a defect in most corporations as soon as you get of any scale. I have a CFO, I have a CTO, I have a chief sales officer. And the moment that happens, they then aren't treating the organization as a system, and they're not inherently treating it as a cross-functional organization at their level. So there's no one minding the keep of that. And so the decisions that they make are actually optimized for a function, which is completely destructive to an agile transformation. And I believe fundamentally that is actually at the core of it. They're just optimizing for the wrong thing. They're optimizing the thing they're incented on.
Yeah. This is, again, this just speaks to the complexity of this whole thing, right? We have to think about what are all the incentives and motivations and fears that individuals have, especially those leaders. Going back to having your compelling purpose, your urgency, and that powerful coalition. Do you have the right incentive structures in place? I actually had a conversation today with my biggest client around this idea of the powerful coalition, their leadership team, and she was saying, I'm not sure we have the right people, and sometimes people don't show up. It doesn't feel like it's important to them. And we started talking about, well, what are their incentives? What goals do they have that would compel them to want to be part of this and have it be important to them? So we started talking about maybe we need to have greater alignment on organization goals, something like OKRs that are going to give people those incentives and alignment around what they're trying to do together. So yeah, it's something that I think is missing.
I have a question for you, Brad.
Yeah.
So you can also look at these 6 keys as a way to filter out clients, filter out projects from a consultancy perspective. I've been an Agile consultant for a while. And one of the things that I do is if I get leadership buy-in, that's great, but I have to have leadership engagements, which is one of the things you touched on.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of something else you've done within those keys that you've used to kind of filter out a client, or maybe even stepped into a client and been like, oh, yeah, I should have seen that coming into it. It should not have accepted that engagement.
Yeah, that's a good insight. I do like to try to use this as filtering criteria. So, I'll often start an engagement with, an executive sort of overview and alignment session. And out of that, part of what I'm trying to do, honestly, is paint the picture for them of this is really hard stuff, and this is going to be a long journey. And if you're gonna jump into this, you better be committed to really thinking about your culture. And if I get a leadership team that says, yeah, I don't know, we're not really so interested in doing this culture thing, could you just work with some teams and help them to do Scrum? I mean, those kind of things are indicators to me that, yeah, maybe I want to walk away. I don't have the commitment. It's tough, of course, because sometimes you'll get initial indicators of the right executives saying the right things, but then you'll get into it later and find out that they're not walking the walk as well either. But it is a good insight. I do like to try to, again, get that sense up front. Do I really have a commitment? What is your urgency and compelling reason? And do I have the right level of leaders engaged? So can't say that I've been perfect at doing that, certainly.
As you said, it can't be perfect because people will say something different than how it actually is in reality. Yeah.
I love it. Actually, Randy came up with this recently when we were talking. He called it the automatic contract escalation clause, which is, if you don't do these things, then when I renew the contract, your rates are going up 50%.
I like that.
I like Randy.
We all do.
Yeah, and honestly, I haven't actually, I've come very close to that with some clients of just saying, hey, look, I'm going to walk away. You're not ready for this, and call me back when you are. Happy to work with you then, but that still may happen. I have some clients where I've come very close to pulling that trigger and just saying, call me back when you're really ready to do this.
Have you pulled that trigger, Brad?
I have not. I've threatened to do it with clients to where then they say, oh, wait a minute, here's what we'll do to sort of get back on track. So I think the threat of doing that might be enough, but yeah, it's a tough thing. I mean, it's hard to turn away a paying customer, but sometimes it's the right thing to do.
And force the really direct conversation that you need to have sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious from your experience there, like how often do you get like a sense of clarity in that, like from the client where it's like, you're right, I'm not ready?
I don't know. Again, I'm thinking back. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been in that situation enough. I don't think I've been in that situation enough to really say there. Usually at that point, there may be a general lack of awareness. So I think you got to help clients to see what's really going on and how that leadership, lack of engagement or lack of alignment or lack of right incentives or urgency is really leading to that. It's not always easy to do.
Thanks. And yeah, like I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering curiously because I don't come from that consulting side. But I've definitely worked with leadership that has sometimes had a level of clarity when you push them, and you can talk them into it. It's like, I didn't think this was what I thought it was, and they'll realize it pretty quick.
Yeah. I think reflecting on it a little bit, I have experienced the issue before, again, where I'll hear the right things, but then I don't see the follow-up. I don't always see them walking the walk after they've said the right things. So, all right, I've lost track of how we're doing on time here. I think we're probably out of time.
We're just about there. Yes.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. I wanted to give a couple of notes real quick. The sign-in sheet, just about everybody signed it. I noticed a couple people looking for jobs. So if you're hiring, take a look. Also, I forgot to plug the Slack channel for Agile Denver, which there's a link to at the top of the sign-in sheet. And that's a great place to post that you're looking for a job or to see if people are posting jobs, because they often post, there are often Scrum Master positions posted there. So join that Slack channel, join in the conversation. There are a lot of really great Agilists on there. So it's a good way to also be, in the community and communicating with people. So Brad, thank you so much. That was awesome. It was a great conversation with everybody too. What really fun to get a chance to talk.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody for weighing in and sharing stories. That makes it a lot more interesting for me than just talking at little video boxes on the screen.
With a name.
Yeah.
Not a face.
So I can come back to the next meeting?
Please.
Yeah.
And thanks we got both coasts. We have San Francisco and Sacramento, and we've got Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. So it's great to have everyone here from all over.
Coast to coast.
One of the benefits of the pandemic is we've widened our scope. That's really fun. Randy, anything to add?
No, it was great. As usual, great insight from Brad. The very first Mile High Agile conference, Brad did a talk and did a hands-on, here's how you can lead an Agile transformation. And I used it to lead my first rather small Agile transformation and never looked back. So thanks, Brad.
Absolutely. You're welcome. I'm glad it worked for someone. Good to hear.
All right. Well, thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Brad.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Super insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks for organizing. Appreciate it.
Yep. It's always fun to have you.
Yep.
See
Talk to you
later.
again soon, I hope.
Yep. Hope so.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.